Today we begin Siman Gimel, the third Siman in Shulchan Aruch, the halachas of Beis HaKisei, the halachas of the washroom. The first group of halachas, the first 7 halachas that we're going to be learning, include the concept of tznius in the washroom, the special halachas of tznius as they apply to the washroom. We're going to see 2 sifim on that. There's a collection of halachas telling us what direction a washroom is supposed to be facing, or if one does not have a washroom and he's relieving himself, the directions that he's supposed to be facing or directions that he's not supposed to be facing. We're going to see there are sort of 3 sifim dealing with that. And another sif dealing with the practicalities where one finds it difficult to use the washroom. And the very first halacha, which we'll begin with. The first halakha says that before entering the washroom, you're supposed to say hischabdu mechubadim. But today we don't do that. What is this all about? So it used to be that people were conscious of the fact that wherever they went, there were angels, there were malachim that were escorting them for protection. Bizman hazeh, we do not know that we are on the level of Yiras Shamayim, where we would be deserving of having angels surround us. In those days, because you were surrounded by an angel would not accompany you to the washroom. So before entering a washroom, you would tell the angel, wait for me, I'll be back soon. Today we don't do that. So every time we're about to enter the washroom, we are makayim the words of the Shulchan Aruch that today our minhag is not to tell the angels to wait for us. That's Sif Aleph. Now, Sif Beis is the beginning of the special halachas of tznius in the washroom. It is here in the Bir Halacha that he brings the source to the mitzvah of tznius altogether. It is the mitzvah of V'haya Machanecha Kadosh, the mitzvah he sends us to the Smak, the Sefer Mitzvah HaKatzur, one of the Rishonim, one of the baalei actually. He says that the mitzvah of V'haya Machanecha Kadosh, where when you go to battle, it says that you're supposed to go and take a shovel along with your armaments in order to clean up after yourself. Because even at the battlefield, you're supposed to see to it that things are kept dignified, and because there is no washroom, make sure that it is kept clean. From there, we learn the concept of dignity. The Smak includes in all of that all of the halachas of tznius that we've been covering. Even the halacha that a Talmid Chacham has to dress in a more appropriate way, in a way that is appropriate for whom he is, his stature in society. All of that is included in the mitzvah of V'haya Machanecha Kadosh. So halacha is that in the washroom as well, what you're supposed to be is a tzanua, which means you do not uncover yourself too early. You do not uncover yourself until you're actually sitting down. And similarly, the Mishnah Berurah adds that you will cover yourself immediately before you get up. Just as you're getting up, you're to cover yourself. Because there too, just because there was a need to use the washroom does not mean that even that room is free from dignity. Understand, the parsha that teaches us, according to the Smak, the concept of tznius, was the halacha of the washroom in the battlefield. That would certainly apply at home. Your own washroom at home has to be done, things have to be done in a dignified manner, which really essentially is teaching us that there is no situation in life and there's no place in life that is ever free from the need for the appropriate dignity. So you use the washroom, of course you do, but you do not uncover yourself unnecessarily, not too early. And the same thing when rising from the washroom, what you do is you cover yourself immediately. The Ramah adds several other halachas to this. First of all, that a washroom is supposed to be a private place. You don't walk in there together with somebody else in order to use the washroom. You don't speak. Speaking in the washroom is prohibited, even when you're not actually using the washroom. The Mishnah Berurah mentions that in time of need, you're allowed to speak there. But even in time of need, when you're actually using the washroom, at that point, you're not supposed to speak at all. If someone asks you a question and you're there, so if you're not actually using the washroom, if necessary, you can answer them immediately. Whereas if you're actually using the washroom, then you're not to answer him. The other thing is, he says you're supposed to close the door. It's not supposed to be an open place. A washroom is supposed to be a place that has a door. Meaning, even though the halakha of tznius is that you're supposed to behave when you're alone, the same way that you behave when there are other people around, That doesn't mean that every situation in life calls for spectators. The washroom is a place where it's dignified. The dignified way of dealing with the washroom is to see to it that it's got a door. So that was the second halakha. Then we go on to Sif Gimel, which is referring to the issue of someone who knows that he's going to have difficulty using the washroom. And apparently one of the ways to stimulate one's body that people would use, they would take something and actually try to open the opening. So the halakha there was that you should not do that once you're sitting down because of people that were using black magic, they would be able to have a shlita over you. They would be able to affect you. So instead you do that before you sit down. The Mishnah Berurah mentions other ways that one can see to it that he uses the washroom when he feels that he may not be able to. One of them is walking. Walking is supposed to stimulate. And another thing he says, if you find that you're having difficulty using the washroom, think about something else. Distract yourself. And this way the body will find it will find it easier to relieve itself. Then we go to Sif Daled, which really takes us back to the halachas of tznius. So Sifim Beis and Daled are referring to the halachas of tznius in the washroom. And there the Shulchan Aruch says that even when using the washroom, and you've got to uncover yourself, you do not uncover more than what is necessary. In the case of a man, a tefach behind him, 2 tefachim in front of him. In the case of a woman, only a tefach behind her and nothing in front of her whatsoever. The way that one would apply this to a situation where we do not wear these pieces of cloth that we just wrap around ourselves, we dress differently, is that what you're supposed to do is uncover only what is absolutely necessary in order to effectively use the washroom and not get your clothing soiled. So that the halakha is that you do not uncover anything unnecessarily. Now we get to the next group of halachas, the halachas of directions. The Gemara tells us that the Shechina is in the west. In the Beis HaMikdash, we know the Ulam and then the Heichal, they were the western part of the entire complex, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim was the westernmost part of it. The Shechina is in the west, whatever that is supposed to mean, but the Shechina is towards the west, wherever you are. As a result of it, the halakha is that you're supposed to be conscious of that, and that when you're relieving yourself, you are not supposed to be facing either the west or the side that faces the west, which is the east. Now, the halakha is as follows. First of all, we are talking about a place that does not have walls, an open place. Now, what does an open place mean? An open place means a large area, even if it's got some fence around it, but you're nowhere near the walls. So if you're talking about a washroom that's got a wall, the halakha is that this halakha does not apply. Second of all, the Ramah brings down the halakha that this does not apply unless one is relieving himself, whereas if you're talking about urinating, one does not have to be careful where he is facing. The Mishnah Berurah brings down that there are machmirim. There are those who are machmir. However, he says that considering the way our clothes work, you are not really uncovering all that much of yourself, and therefore the minhag will be like the Shulchan Aruch. So again, if you're in a place that does not have walls, then you have to make sure that you're not facing east and west. Instead, you should be facing north or south. That is the halakha of Sif Hey. In Sif Vav, it mentions that the same thing applies with regard to a bedroom for a married couple, that the beds, according to the Shulchan Aruch, should not be between east and west, but they should be between north and south. And the Mishnah Berurah mentions that the heads should be to the north. The head of the bed should be to the north, one's head. However, he brings the Ramah Mipano in the name of the Zohar, who says the opposite. The Mishnah Berurah favors the Shulchan Aruch. Although there are others that disagree, the Mishnah Berurah, and he brings down in the name of the Gra, if you study the Zohar correctly, you'll come to the same conclusion as the Shulchan Aruch, and that is once again that one's head should be to the north, and the bed should be running from north to south rather than from east to west. The Shulchan Aruch says that this would apply to a married couple even when one's wife is not there. And the Mishnah Berurah mentions that if one is sleeping clothed and his wife isn't there, then the halakha would not apply at all. The next halakha, also the same inyan, and this is talking about somebody who finds himself in a place that it is visible to the Makom HaMikdash. Menhat Sofim Ulamala. Sofim is the place that you can see Harabayis, you can see the Makom of the Mikdash. So he says there that one who is being matil mayim, he is passing water in a place that he can see the Beis HaMikdash. The halacha is that he is not supposed to be facing the Makom HaMikdash, or the opposite, what he should be facing is one of the other directions. The halacha here too is that if you're talking about a place that has a mechitza, so there too one could be mekel. Now the Mishnah Berurah brings something else down as well, and that is that not only does this halacha apply to the Makom HaMikdash, but this halacha will apply as well to a shul, which means that the washroom of a shul should not be facing the shul. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you have a mechitza, if you have a wall there, that's all right, but he's very careful in the way he words this. The wall must be an additional wall. Meaning, if it is simply the wall of the washroom that is facing the shul, then you should not be relieving yourself facing the shul. If the wall is a separate wall, then that's not a problem. So that, for example, within a shul itself, if what you have is a washroom that is facing the sanctuary, and that means that the stalls are actually set up in a way that when you use the washroom, you are facing the sanctuary, that is considered wrong. You would have to have an additional wall, so that, say, if there's another, if what you have is some kind of corridor, you've got a hall, and only then comes the wall to the shul, only then would it be permissible. But if you just have the wall of the washroom that is separating between the washroom and the shul, then it is not right to be facing the shul. People have to know this halakha when they design shuls. You're always supposed to make sure that there's ample space in the washroom, and there are lots of washrooms, like the Mishnah Berurah said, so that you will not find people that are davening having to use the washroom without using it. It has to be easily accessible, but at the same time, you have to make sure that you're giving the shul the proper respect. Now we have another set of halachas with regard to tznius. In the case of somebody that finds himself without an actual washroom, but he's relieving himself out in a field, so the halacha is that he's got to make sure that it's far enough away for someone not to be able to see him. But, and this is an important halacha that applies to a regular washroom as well, there is no halacha that says that someone else cannot hear you. If you're embarrassed, you're embarrassed. If you're not embarrassed, you're not embarrassed. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. I think the importance of this halacha, aside from saying that there's no halacha saying that you have to be worried about someone else hearing you, is the difference between tznius and embarrassment. The halachas of tznius have nothing to do with embarrassment. Busha is something else. The halachas of tznius are to be dignified. If you're dignified, you're dignified. What is considered a lack of dignity is a lack of dignity. In terms of the fact that someone else is aware that you are using the washroom because of the sounds, that is not a lack of dignity. As long as it's behind closed doors. That is not an act that is not an act that we would say is undignified. It's only normal for a human being to use the washroom. The fact that you're visible is out of place. But in terms of being heard, that is not a lack of dignity. If a person's embarrassed, that's embarrassment. That's not a lack of dignity. It's something totally different. Meaning the halachas of tznius teach us to be more dignified people, not to be more inhibited people. Inhibitions and dignity are not necessarily related in any way whatsoever. So the halacha is that you should not be seen, whereas as far as being heard, that's up to you. Halacha doesn't say anything on the subject. The next halacha is that you should not sit down with too much force. It's considered unhealthy. There's a halakha in Shulchan Aruch. In other words, you sit down slowly. There's one other halakha that is mentioned here, and that is which hand to use when cleaning oneself in the washroom. The halakha is that you're not supposed to use your right hand. There are many different reasons that are brought down. Among them, that is the hand that one writes Torah with. That is the hand that one points in the Torah. So instead, one is supposed to use the left hand. However, the Mishnah Berurah mentions that when using the left hand, you should be careful not to use the middle finger of the left hand, because the middle finger is the one that we wrap our tefillin around. and therefore one would have to use only the other fingers. The Mishnah Berurah or the Shulchan Aruch do not make it clear whether they are referring to someone who is using some kind of say in our case, toilet paper, in a way that the hands are not going to get soiled, or was he referring to a situation where the hands will get soiled? And the difference will be if you're using toilet paper in a way that your hands are going to remain clean, does this halakha apply or not? It seems that most people do customarily follow the halakha of the Shulchan Aruch even when using toilet paper. So that one does not use his right hand, he uses his left hand except for the middle finger. And then there's a long discussion in the Bir Halacha with various different opinions. How we apply this in the case of somebody who is a lefty, and depending on a lefty for what? Is there a difference between someone who writes with his right hand but does everything else with his left hand, writes with his left hand, does everything else with his right hand? He goes through all the different opinions on the subject. In the case of a righty, you use your left hand for wiping oneself, with the exception of the middle finger. And in the case of somebody who is not a clear righty or lefty, he's got himself a shaila. The next halacha is the halacha of what to use. In those days, they did not have toilet paper. And therefore, we were being told that you are not supposed to use anything ceramic, as well as you are not to use anything made of dry grass, because anything that's flammable, anything that could burn, there is a chashash that the same way that it could be consumed with fire, so too, kishuf, black magic, can attack the human being by way of it. We do not understand the relationship, but that's the way it worked. The Shulchan Aruch says that today that we do not use the fields, but we're actually using washrooms or whatever it was that they had, but they were still an enclosed place that was not out in the open. One does not have to worry about being affected by kishuf. And as a result of it, we use paper today, although based on the Shulchan Aruch, we're out on the fields, it couldn't use paper because kishuf can affect it. The Mishnah Berurah here mentions that one should be careful when leaving the washroom, that he did not soil any place that another person can get filthy from. Which means that before you leave a washroom, there's actually a halakha that you're supposed to inspect it to make sure that you did not get anything filthy that could then harm another human being. This, although it's brought down in the halachas of Beis HaKisei, obviously, this would be a simple halacha bein adam l'chavero to make sure that you're not being a mazik, that you're not harming another individual. The next halacha, the next mechaber, says that you're supposed to exercise the same tznius at night, meaning in the dark, that you do by day. The issue is not just, since it's day, someone could possibly see you. We already saw the halachas of tznius in the washroom based on the fact that the human being is supposed to develop on his own an appreciation for dignity, even though there's nobody watching. So the same thing applies in the dark, even though you couldn't even see yourself. You're supposed to be as dignified in the dark as you are in the light. Dignity is not measured by what's visible. Dignity is measured by the way you present yourself and the way you behave. Sifyud Gimel is the halacha that you have to make sure when passing water that you do not get yourself wet in a way that when leaving the washroom, it'll look as if while passing water he got himself wet, because people may get the impression that he is suffering from some kind of a physical ailment whereby when passing water he splashes all over himself, which could consider him as somebody who the Torah calls a kushuvcha, somebody who has sustained some kind of bodily injury in a way that he cannot pass water regularly. The problem with that is because it's brought down in the poskim that such a person could not have children, and if other people are going to see that he got his clothing wet, then they're going to start asking questions about his children. Who then is the father of his children? So the halakha is that you're supposed to make sure that you do not get your clothing wet. So you're supposed to take whatever precautions are necessary in order not to splash. Which brings us now to the halakha, the Sifyud Dalid and Tesvav, which are dealing with a halakha, a sugya in the Gemara. The halakha is that one is not supposed to touch the aver at any time when using the washroom, So the halakha is as follows. If you're dealing with someone who is not married, or is married and his wife is either not tahor or not in town, so the halakha is that he is not supposed to touch the aver except for the outer tip of it. The lashon that it says here is min ha'ama me'ator ulamata. Me'ator ulamata. Lamata means outside, going away from the body. So that's where it's permissible, and it's permissible only when using the washroom. In the case of someone who is married, the halakha is he could touch at any part of the aver when using the washroom, just to scratch, it says, is asr. And there's a midas chasidus. Mishnah Berurah brings down, there's a midas chasidus of even someone who is married, not touching the aver itself, once again, except for the very tip of it. That is permissible. Now, with regard to any other time someone wants to scratch, so it says, Mishnah Berurah brings down an opinion that if it is through a thick garment, that is permissible, but there are those who say that we do not know just how thick a garment is to be, how thick a piece of cloth is to be, a washcloth, for example, so that we don't really know what it is that is permissible. Aside from that, the Gemara mentions that Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was called Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He was called Kaddish. He says that because his hand never went beneath his navel. There's a machlokas showing him exactly how to translate that, but based on that, it would seem that the Mishnah Berurah is holding that the halakha is that one does not even scratch his hair there, whereas one could comb it. Using a comb, that everyone would agree is the equivalent of a thick garment, and that would be permissible. Then comes Siftes Vav, and that is if one has to raise the aver while using the washroom, so the halakha is that he is allowed to push it up through the beitzim rather than touching the aver itself. Sif Yud Zayin says, Hamash hen nekavav. If someone has to use the washroom but doesn't go, he doesn't because, say, he's too busy, over mishum bal teshakzu. He is over on the isur of bal teshakzu as nafsho seichem, do not do something that's disgusting. There is no clear description here in the Mishnah Berurah of whether we're dealing with an isur d'oraisa or an isur d'rabbanan. The Mishnah Berurah does refer us to the Pri Megadim, who says that kavod habrius, for example, the washroom that's available is something that you find is repulsive. And you want to wait until you find something that's cleaner. You find that it just goes against you. For the sake of kavod habrius, for the sake of self-respect, or for some reason you're in a situation where walking out would be highly embarrassing, there it would be permissible. The Mishnah Berurah does not say why. However, the lashon that he uses is borrowed from the Pri Megadim whom he is quoting, and he says there, Ha'isur bal teshakzu nidche mipnei kavod habrius. Kavod habrius pushes it aside, which is generally the way we would phrase the concept that kavod habrius is docha and isur d'rabbanan. We understand that the Rabbanan did not make their isurim when they interfered with human dignity. So the rule is kavod habrius is docha and isur d'rabbanan. The Mishnah Berurah is quoting the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim actually says bal teshakzu is a d'rabbanan, and as a result of it, kavod habrius is dochet. The Mishnah Berurah did not go that far, although he does sound like it. So I think it's important to point out, the concept of bal teshakzu, of not doing something disgusting, may very well be an isur d'oraisa according to everybody. It is just that. It is difficult for us to say that if the reason why one is not using the washroom is because he finds the one available disgusting, that he is breaking the isur of bal teshakzu, don't do something disgusting. Who is to say that using a disgusting washroom is less disgusting than holding oneself back for a while? So that in terms of the doraisa, it may very well be that he is breaking nothing. However, the Rabbanan clearly phrased restraining oneself as in violation of bal teshakzu. That is a Rabbanan. In other words, the Rabbanan made a general rule that restraining yourself from using the washroom is included in bal teshakzu. And there one doesn't stop and think, well, is what I'm doing really disgusting? Is it not disgusting? The Rabbanan, it is a Rabbanan form of this particular mitzvah. For that we say, kavod habrius is docha that Rabbanan. There you have to come on to the fact that the Rabbanan did not make their halachas when they interfered with kavod habriyos. So once again, the halacha is that one is not to restrain himself. When he has to use the washroom, he should make sure to find one and use it right away. Whereas, if what's available is something that he finds difficult to use, it just goes against him, or for some reason it is highly embarrassing for him to leave at this point, the halacha is that he may wait until he finds a more opportune moment when it will not interfere with kavod habriyos. With regard to passing water, the halacha there is that there is an isser of baalei shakzu. Not only is there an isser of baalei shakzu, there's another law that the Mishnah Berurah brings down, which is not to make oneself sterile. Lo yevachem okar, lo yevacha okar. The halacha there is that it is considered really dangerous, so much so that the Mishnah Berurah previously mentioned that here one should not worry about kavod habriyos, meaning even if it is highly embarrassing, he should go and pass water if he has to, and if necessary, even in a way where it'll be visible to others. Today, generally speaking, washrooms are readily available and there should be no need for it, but if one is in a place where there isn't, and there is no choice, rather than restraining himself when he really has to pass water, he is to use it, although other people may possibly see. The other halacha that the Mishnah Berurah brings down here is the halacha of being careful to clean oneself well after using the washroom, after relieving himself. Because the halacha is that one is not to speak Torah, one is not to daven until he is perfectly clean. The details of this halacha will actually be discussed later. The Mishnah Berurah already brings it up now, and he even mentions that it is a good idea for one to use water in cleansing himself to make sure that he really has gotten himself clean.